Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Arts, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Lab virtual symposium today. We're glad everyone could join us. I wanted to give a quick shout out. First of all, my name is Doug Noonan. I'm a co-director here at the AEI Lab. And I wanted to say a big thank you to the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs here for helping to host this, and especially to the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation for helping put this great assembly together and what I'm sure will be a really fascinating conversation to follow.
Hi, everyone. I am the co-director of the Arts, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Lab, and my name is Joanna Veronkovich. And again, thank you for being here. We're really happy to have everyone in attendance, especially our panelists and our keynoters, which I'm so excited to hear from today. If you haven't already, we have our keynote pre-recorded keynote presentations on our website. So take a look at those if you haven't seen them already. But I wanted to also thank our partner in crime, not so much crime, but productivity, Culture Source, and they will help. Culture Source helped arrange this event, as well as you'll see a couple of our moderators are the stars from Culture Source. So I also wanted to give a big thank to our sponsor, the National Endowment for the Arts Research Labs program, which we are so grateful to them. We would not be able to do any of these exciting programs without their support. And then finally, thank you to our O'Neill staff who have been tirelessly working on our events, especially this one recently. Julia Driscoll and Nikki Rolfe Boyd, as well as our GAs, our graduate assistants, Suri and Ariel. Thank you so much for all of your work on all of this. So with that, we're going to get started with our event, and I will hand it over to our moderator for our first keynoter panel. So Omari Rush is the Executive Director of Culture Source. And with that, take it away, Omari.
Great. Thanks so much, Joanna and Doug. Hello, everyone. My name is Omari Rush. As Joanna just mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Culture Source, a coalition of cultural organizations and creative people based in Detroit, Michigan, and serving the Southeast Michigan region. We are very pleased, proud, honored, all those words to be partners in productivity. Joanna, I really like that, with the AEI Lab. And I'll speak for myself and my two other colleagues who are joining me in this space, Sarah Nishikawa and Kaylee Wilder. We're really excited by the ideas, the energy and enthusiasm that's been part of both the planning for this session and what we expect will be part of the session today. We will be together in this first part of our day for 90 minutes with four amazing folks. I'm not overselling them at all. They are really amazing talents, and we're so lucky to have them in our field of arts and culture and just in society generally. I'll again do what Joanna just did and encourage you to look at their keynotes online, though we're going to cover some of that, so you don't feel like you need to do that while we're in the moment. Just be with us and be as present as you can right now. But please do make sure to check that out. As we get started, we'll of course do some introductions, because it's helpful to know who's in the room. And to the panelists, of course, first, I just want to say thank you all for being with us and for sharing and giving and all those things. We really appreciate your time today. If you would, as part of the introduction, say your name, and then share with us, three descriptors that are about yourself or your environment that are visible, and then three descriptors about yourself or your environment that are not visible to us as attendees and as already fans. Just as a little bit of modeling, I'll go first, both modeling and we'll call it a little rehearsal. So hello, everyone. My name is Omari Rush. I have brown skin, the color of, we'll say coconut, that I've had since birth. I have only facial hair right now above my eyes and on my eyelids. also known as eyelashes. And I have blue tape on the walls behind me because I'm expecting to hang a mirror and then a piece of art over the bar over there. So, and then I also, as we said, am executive director of a nonprofit organization. I am a new latecomer fan of Harry Styles and an avid bicyclist. So that is Omari. So first up, why don't we go with Kamal, if you want to share.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Omari. I'm super excited to be here. Much appreciation to Doug and Joanna and all those that made this possible. I am a cisgendered woman with long, dark brown hair that is covering my shoulders. I have a white background that is virtual of a really, pretty bookshelf that I do not have in my house, but I would like to have one day. I am wearing glasses, and I'm a light-skinned Black woman, so I don't know exactly what the color is, but it's definitely cream in your coffee somehow. And three things that you don't see. I'm a mother of three. I live in Los Angeles, and I am a person with an invisible disability. I have bipolar type 2, which means I am diagnosed workaholic.
Super fantastic. And would you mind saying your name for us?
Kamal Sinclair.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kamal. Sydney.
Thanks, Omari. And echoing Kamal's thanks here, I just want to shout out to Doug and Joanna and the entire team here. Y'all have made this virtual convening seem easy and intuitive and natural when they are truly anything but. So thank you so much for your efforts there. But my name is indeed Sydney Skybetter, and I am a cis white man with skin the color of a Soviet gulag. I'm wearing a blue shirt and have asymmetrical facial scruff. And I'm a choreographer by training and professor here at Brown University, coming at you live from the unceded lands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag territories.
Great, thanks, Sydney. Michelle, you want to give it a go?
I do. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Elam, and I'm speaking to you near my academic home, Stanford University. And I also want to recognize that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone land, which is of great living importance continuing to the Ohlone people. And I identify she, her, a woman of color, though like Kamal, lightly melanated. So there's a lot of cream in that coffee. That's a whole other topic. At this moment, I'm wearing a black scoop neck silk blouse with a slippery feel to it. My skin is nut brown. My hair is dark brown. It's curly. It's going skyward at the moment because of humidity. Because of a surgery for the last few weeks, my vision has been temporarily obscured. So I'm wearing opaque black glasses to protect from the light. I'm in a virtual background of a David Hockney painting, which I think cost like 20 million. So it's in my aspirational acquisition. It's a painting of a forest path. And I'm in an auditory environment right now, saturated with noise pollution. There's the pulsing sounds of housing construction nearby. And I'm a professor in the English department, as well as a faculty associate director at Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered AI and former director of African-American Studies.
Excellent, Michelle. Excellent. And, all about the affirmations, it's good energy. Lauren.
Hey, y'all. Lauren Ruffin. I use the she series of pronouns. I am a brown-skinned Black woman wearing a really dope shirt that's really not showing up on Zoom the way that I want it to. I'm pretty disappointed about that, but it's like orange. It's got this like pattern that if my camera were better would be like doing the psychedelic thing. Anyway, I'll move on. I've got blue round rim glasses, short hair that needs a haircut, pretty curly today. And I'm in one of those hermetically sealed like cubicle things that they make now. yeah, like it's kind of cool. There's no sound at all.
For you, Lauren.
Yeah, no, I'm locked into a vault right now. It feels a little futuristic. Like I wonder if I'm just gonna shoot off into space in this pod. And Michelle, just so we have some kinship, after this, I'm going to have LASIK surgery. So I too will be wearing dark glasses for a while. So I'm like zooming out of here right to the doctor. So super stoked to be here talking with some of the people I've known for a long time and to make some new friends.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Oh, I
so
should
much.
say who I am, right? I forgot to do
Oh,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
You know what? And if I were a better like moderator, I would have trusted my memory and said, "Oh, Lauren didn't say that." Yes, please,
Yeah,
Lauren.
no, that's so classic. I'm like the worst at intros. So I'm currently the head of movement building at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, and recently accepted a tenure track position at Arizona State University, where I'll be associate professor of world building and visualizing futures. So really excited to be here again. Say it twice, because who knows how to close things without saying that you're really excited to be on Zoom.
Yes. And then I was like, Omar, how do I normally close things? And it's usually with some awkward filler thing, like what I just did. So one, thanks folks for those descriptions and for the color that you brought to it. It's very helpful for all of us to kind of engage. Folks in the Zoom room, we're really glad that you're with us here too. John, I saw your chat. It's really great to see you or imagine you. I'm not seeing your face, but I saw your words, and it's great to see you. We would love to know who else is in the room, and so please feel free to follow your colleagues who are already doing really wonderful introductions, and let us know how you identify, who you are in the chat. We'd love to get that sense, and it helps create a sense of community, because we are that, because we all live on the planet Earth, and so we're sharing space, planetary space, but we're all in this space together and here for each other. So for our chat, for the remaining 90 minus 15, 75 minutes, we will talk to each one of our panelists about their ideas from their keynote presentations, and just learn a little bit more about what they're thinking, how they're thinking as individuals and as a collective. We'll have a group dialogue, and then of course at the end we will invite everyone in the room to share their questions, ask their questions, share comments, and just be in conversation with each other. So I encourage you all to, throughout the session, use the chat to write questions as they come to you. My colleague Kaylee is going to be helping us collect those, or save them until the end and share them then. With that, we will get on to some summaries from the keynotes. So Lauren, I wonder if you might unmute and talk to us a little bit about what you were getting at in your keynote. If folks had not had a chance to view it, what would they have heard, seen, experienced through your words? Which,
Yeah.
Thank you again for sharing.
Yeah. So one of the things I think about a lot is this, the idea that at some point in the next probably 3 to 5 years, the majority of the cultural sector will be actually digital creators, whether we admit that or not. And that we're actually tapping into an economy that is, just billions of dollars, almost trillions of dollars at scale. And yet, we continue to pretend that that's not happening. Artists aren't getting support there. And because our sector, which in many ways has a stronger moral compass than the traditional capitalistic market sector, but because we don't weigh in the digital space, there's a huge amount of inequity appearing, in particular for folks who are non-cisgendered white men. So everybody else. And in particular, I focus on folks who were influencers. It's the data there is beginning to trickle out in a really particular way, which is that when we have, and so many of the students that I work with have zero interest in having full-time jobs. They're going to be 1099 employees. They want to be influencers. They want to be freelance creators. They want to work with brands. They want to be just doing dope projects all the time. And what happens is, because Black and brown, queer, and female creators end up being offered product often or much lower value for their work in that space, they're just losing tons of revenue. There are no structures, no regulation. There is no, and I think a lot about like, could we have a guaranteed minimum wage for digital creators if we haven't been able to do it in the traditional sense? But because there's no minimum wage and no regulation with regard to how they're paid, this allows inequity to spring up. The other thing that I'm thinking about a lot, which I didn't say in my talk, and this is a talk that I've given before, but it was twice as long, is the long-term impact of having folks who are 30 and under not being full-time employees, which is they're never going to be able to get a mortgage or build generational wealth until we really fundamentally change how the creative sector, how creators are financed, and how the financial industry really looks at them. So there's a long-term sort of arc of this work, and that was pretty much what my keynote was about. I think at the end I closed with some potential so we can think about policy, we should think about finance, and just sort of and how we operate in a different way as a cultural sector, because I think we're gonna have to lead the way here instead of letting the capital market drive what happens to many of the artists that we're working with now, and most certainly nearly all of the artists we'll be working with in the future.
Mm-hmm. You just said that you said the bit about what it means to build generational wealth and some of the ways in which people's approach to employment and making income may challenge that. And the whole movement of software as service, and making everything a service as opposed to something that you own. I also wonder how that's going to change the ability for people to generate long-term wealth for them and their children, because it's going to just so much change is happening. And so if you think about this digital transition, this transition to either pure digital work or extremely robust digital work, what's your sense about how we get there? Like, what are you seeing? Are people going to be forced? Are you seeing people proactively do it? Will something have changed where people have different kinds of resources? What does that transition look like to you?
Yeah. Well, I'll give an example as a response, and I do want to sort of tease out the piece about ownership here, because while software as a service is happening, we're also seeing opportunities, in particular on the blockchain, where artists are really able to think about fractional sale of their work, with smart contracts, where people are selling NFTs directly, are selling directly to a fan community. So ownership is both sort of waning and sort of growing in a way that's pretty cool. But some of you, I'm guessing a number of people on this call know Liz Lerman or know that Liz is, know who Liz is. We had dinner last night. I'm in Phoenix right now, and Liz is doing a piece, doing Wicked Bodies at YBC in a couple months. And we're talking about, how can we do a digital activation for that? So, Liz has a dance piece. And Liz is, I think, a consummate dance artist, not super digital, but I would love to do a motion capture of Liz. And we could turn Liz into an NFT. We can do so many things with that piece. And that's what she and I talked about last night. So I don't think it's an either or. I think we're actually going to see, and I think dance is actually in Sydney. I know you're going to be, you're shaking your head. I love your energy, by the way. Like, you're all like, it's like we're at I was about to curse because I have such a dirty mouth. I can't believe I had that yet. But like, it's like we're at a rock concert. But like, Liz is like the consummate dance professional in my mind, right? Like, and sort of thinking about embodied movement and all this sort of dope stuff. But like Liz, at this point in her career, thinking about what it means to go digital, like, to me, it's just a harbinger of like, if Liz can do it, everyone's going to do it. And so I think we have to sort of get rid of this idea that like, you're either a digital artist or you're a fine artist or a performing artist, because it's actually all beginning to blend in this really awesome way.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about how platforms can be beneficial to those artists and creators and not extractive, what do you think it will take to kind of flip those spaces, or what's your sense about new spaces being created that are supporting the public good, or again, not about exploitation?
Yeah. I mean, I think the beautiful thing,
and I'm sorry, Lauren.
Oh, no,
and also promoting not furthering senses of inequity also, to stick to the topic also. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think the beautiful thing about, and again, there's two things happening. You've got platforms that are venture backed, which creates a problem in terms of sort of really trying to milk creators for everything they're worth, like just You know, all the fees are exorbitant when you think about sort of, you know, Facebook Meta, which is, you know, wants us to work, live, and play on their platform, but creators are taking it's a 47.5% cut of everything they sell on the platform, which is awful. So that's over here. The beautiful thing is you've now got creators who are building platforms, and they're building them in ways that are really rooted in collectivity and liberation and shared ownership. And where they're able to do that, and they're able to reap the benefits in particular by issuing crypto tokens, tokens or cryptocurrency on the blockchain, they're actually self-funded. And I think part of what's really important for us to remember is the more we can support creators who are trying to organize for their own collective ownership, the better off it is for creators themselves. So rather than investing in sort of these scalable platforms, we really need to invest in folks who are at the very beginning, at the root, building things that are decentralized typically, and have sort of a level of ownership and earn income built in just because it's on things like the blockchain, and because they have a decent model with regard to a community that pays for itself and owns a bit of the platform.
Yeah, you know, Lauren, personally, and I'm going to invite Michelle into this conversation. That last piece that you shared is energizing because it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be a new creation, but it just is about supporting the people that are already positioned who are already these pioneers, already these innovators, and just support their kind of stars getting closer and the kind of emergence that they embody, developing these new systems and spaces. And if we can just create some nourishment for them, then it allows for that to happen. And folks, I'm actually kind of drawing from the Berkana Institute's 2 loops model, which if somebody wants to search the www and post it in the chat for us, that'd be great. That's what I've heard. Michelle, I'm wondering what you heard from that dialogue.
I'm still sitting with the www. It's just like, I'm so excited by Lauren's work. Can I just say up front, because, and I appreciate your characterization of it too, because I think there's often this uncoupling between the vulgar issue of financing and money and art, you know, as if it was supposed to be art for art's sake. And I don't hear a lot of people in the space talking about financing and funding, especially in the digital space. I remember when I have a couple of questions about it. One is, and I'm just going to throw them out as I was listening to your really interesting discussion, is you mentioned it's really a shift in the future of work. And so when I hear folks from McKinsey and they're not talking about in the terms that you are, you know, both the post-pandemic, who the demographics are, who are the creators and the creatives, and who are financing, apart from the question about NFTs. So I do have a question, maybe to start with the NFTs, because we're talking about NFTs and blockchain. And for a lot of folks, it's allergic and it does not signal equity or generational wealth. And it comes from, you know, a problematic mindset, as you know, all of that too. And I know there's folks like Amelia Bersking-Winger, who's an Indigenous artist technologist, and others who do think of blockchain in terms of antecedent technologies, that it pre-existed some of the uses of it now. So I don't think the form and mechanism of both credentialing and recompense for digital artists particularly is totally poisoned, but I'm wondering how you navigate that space, just as an initial question, since you were talking about it as one of the primary platforms for compensation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you raise an important part about just sort of the nascentness of the technology. In some ways, it's always been around, and yet it's brand new. You know, our financial systems are going through a similar thing, as we're seeing more character-based lending platforms coming up. I'm old enough to remember going to the bank and not needing ID to get money out of my dad's bank account because I went to church with the teller. So like this level of relationship, and in some ways, what we're seeing with blockchain technologies, and I'll just say digital communities generally, is we're back to actually having really, really close-knit communities in a way we haven't had in a very long time. Folks who are finding each other, they're mission aligned, they're able to work together with collectivity. So there's a different way of organizing online. with regard to the financial impact, I mean, what we're hearing right now is, again, like on two sides. One is everything's getting hacked and your crypto wallets are being stolen. People are losing billions of dollars. And then quietly, you have a lot of stories about Black and brown folks who are profiting on these platforms. The number of Black artists that I've worked with over the last 2 years who have become millionaires, who quietly, right, is actually, it's exponential. And I think a lot about how does this sector one begin to accept things like cryptocurrency? How does the traditional nonprofit art sector begin to call in and these artists and these folks who are making this money, because they actually want to support other projects, but we don't have the mechanism or vehicles for them to do so. And we're afraid of them a little bit. Like, we're like, what is this?
Yeah.
We don't understand this work. There's
Absolutely.
something else that I don't know that you actually had in your question, but that came up for me. And one is the dearth of good data in our sector. And at the risk of being too candid about some folks, some funders who might be supporting this work, our reliance on self-reported data as a sector, which allows folks who are not supporting Black and brown communities to self-report that they are, to overrepresent the value of their work is really problematic. And I would love for us to, instead of funding the same research organizations over and over again, for us to think about publicly accessible resources, because we actually have zero understanding of what the cultural sector looks like, and in particular with regard to digital artists. We don't include graphic designers. We don't include folks who are working in the metaverse. And there's a ton of money and people who are very successful out there that we're leaving behind. You didn't ask that, but it's been top of my mind lately.
I love that.
It's been top of my mind. It's just like we have really shitty data.
Yeah, it's
and
huge.
it's because it's self-reported.
Yeah. Wait, Amari, can I ask one other question? Do we have enough time? Really quickly.
Let's go for it.
Okay,
Go for it.
wait. When you were talking about Liz and digital capsule of choreography, I was just thinking of Rashad Newsom, who just had a huge armory show, who also does Black Queer Vogue moves and is capturing it to create an archive that will be then funded and fueled into a data set to fuel algorithms that change the way we're represented and how we move and think and talk, because he's also folding in Black vernacular speeches as well. And so there's ways in which I can see in terms of equity that are disrupting the way technology represents particularly social identities and what sort of data sets are valuable or not. So when you were saying that, I wanted to just translate it so it didn't look like, sometimes I think we think of performance, especially if it's digitally captured, as not, unless it's scaled, as actually not changing business as usual. And I think there are definitely inroads to do so. I appreciate that you mentioned them. Thanks.
And I appreciate, Lauren, your sense of optimism and you pointing us to things that are already kind of in motion and communities that are already wanting to form. And so just I was hearing a certain amount of increase your awareness of the community and don't be a barrier, don't be an impediment to its the natural development that it's wanting to do. And so I very much appreciated that. I saw somebody from the National Endowment for the Arts on the in the chat, and wanted to point everyone to the Arts Endowment's first kind of scan research study of what's happening in the at the intersection of arts and digital technology. They just did a field scan that was released last year, and so it's starting to get some wheels cranking around this. Lauren, your call for more data, public data about what's happening in the sector. So, and if somebody could be a great community member and drop that in the chat, that'd be great too. So, Lauren, we'll come back to you, but thanks so much for that. Kamal.
Hello, Omari. Yeah, it was hard not to jump right into that conversation.
I hear you. But you had a pretty solid keynote too. What were you getting at? Highlight, summary? What was salient?
I mean, I've been giving this talk for a while now, so some of you on the call on the Zoom may have seen snippets of it in various ways, but it basically is coming out of research that the Ford Foundation commissioned back in 2016 when I was at the Sundance Institute running the New Frontier Lab. And it turned into a book eventually with my co-author Jessica Clark called Making a New Reality. It's a free PDF at makinganewreality.org or .com. Oh, I should know that. Anyway, and basically just looking at, being at that intersection of art and technology and science and social justice, like this kind of convergent space, kind of having that inside, I mean, not really in the inside, but having a kind of insider look at this technology sector from the lens of an artist, from the lens of people that are stewarding kind of a critique on these institutions around social justice, and kind of seeing these incredible power discrepancies and looking at the power of the decisions and the imaginations that are coming out of a very narrow few and its impact on the world. And this started before like Social Dilemma came out and other things that were really starting to now have come to the public discourse, but seeing how some of those things were evolving early on and going, whoa, who's not at the table? And looking at, if they're calling this the fourth industrial revolution, looking at previous industrial revolutions and seeing the impact of exclusion of voices in the past. And Heather Ray, who's a filmmaker and Indigenous activist, talked about at a session at Sundance about how we're just getting the bill for the exclusion of Indigenous values around the Industrial Revolution, and that's climate change. So thinking about this phase of where we're going, who's excluded, and not only are we looking at race, identity, sexuality, but we're also talking about artists. And had an interview with Robert Wong, who was heading the Google Creative Lab at the time. And he was really transparent that he felt unless the artists were at the table in a decision-making role, not just as kind of tinsel, that we were not going to be able to create a human-centered future. And so essentially that was at the core of this presentation, was how do we take that call to action to not fall into the pitfalls of previous kind of innovation and progress narratives, and make sure that we're not creating such an intensive, devastating bill again, like climate change. So the other part of it was I'm in a new role. I'm at the Music Center in Los Angeles, one of the largest performing arts campuses in the country, and in one of the largest metropolitans in the country. And it's a new role called I'm running the Digital Innovation Initiative. And this is huge. I mean, we're talking about, opera and ballet and, the Center Theater Group bringing plays. And so these are some of the kind of oldest analog art forms we have. And we're now living in a smart city, an increasingly smart city. So what does that mean to be a brick and mortar hub in an environment where the blended reality between digital and physical are getting more and more intertwined? And what does that mean in terms of being a cultural hub and hopefully a home for Angelenos in terms of co-creation of what that future of our city looks like, with the arts at the center of that imagination process? So it's a lot. How do we do that in looking at the pitfalls of surveillance capitalism and some of the other incredible challenges around this technology, and also trying to be optimistic in a responsible way about how can we intervene to recenter the arts, recenter diversity of value systems and thought. So that's essentially what the talk was about.
Uh-huh. And it was a solid talk too. You touched on it just at the end of this, but I wonder if you might say just a little bit more as just to get everybody on the same page around this idea of tech advancements, and just how you feel that it's not always an advancement, and where you think things are going wrong. It's such a common phrase, and we always want to be thinking about progress, but my sense from you is that it's not actually always progress.
Well, honestly, I'm very much influenced by thinkers like Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who I've known since we were teenagers, and thinking about how, and just thinking about what are the values of extractive economics that really push those narratives of progress. I mean, obviously, the technology and the sciences that we've been able to uncover are changing things incredibly in terms of our capability. I mean, we're becoming superhuman in many ways. And that's not necessarily, that the amount of learning, the amount of capacity, the amount of expansion, and all that stuff I wouldn't necessarily critique as not progressive in terms of the advancements in our capabilities. But when you think about the progression of how we're utilizing those technologies, that becomes a different question. So one of the people we interviewed was Skawanati, who runs the Indigenous Futures program up at Concordia University. And we were talking about the future of work and artificial intelligence. And, at that time, there was a big conversation around just, not having enough work. Like, what are we going to do with all these people that are out of work? And she said, it's an interesting argument because, looking at it from a Mohawk value system perspective, you're not supposed to just have the abundance of your life in work. You're supposed to have a balance with time with family, time in community, time with creativity, time in nature, and some level of service to the kind of functionality of our society and our those things that we need in terms of food and all those systems. And so when you think about that, is that the way that we're going to utilize new technologies? There have been many moments where everyone's like, oh, the dishwashing, the laundry, like all these advancements like back in the 50s that, oh, we're going to have all this extra time, but instead we didn't kind of balance that, and we become, I mean, as a workaholic, there is this kind of really crazy drive to continue to fill that time with values that are kind of based on capitalistic imperatives and maybe not well-being imperatives.
I think I actually have more meetings now, doing a lot of Zoom meetings and digital cultures and all within the workplace. I have more meetings now than I had before because it's easy to see like back to back. Whereas there's not all this extra time, and I think what you just shared is a great example of, and I'm, Sydney, want to get you in on this also in terms of what you heard, as a great example around having generationally old and rich perspectives in what we're doing today is so important as that kind of balance of in perspective. Sydney, I'm wondering what you heard and what was resonating with you. I mean, we could see what was resonating, or actually only the panelists. We can see the backstage.
Totally.
So nobody was seeing the snaps.
Okay.
But
well,
what was resonating?
A little known fact about me is that I'm a human Muppet character. So like, I'm just kind of like, it's very, I need to sort of tone it down a little bit. But thank you for bringing me in, Omari. And I want you, Kamal, to imagine me making clapping emoji hands when I say there's so much stuff to respond to here. The two or three kind of main takeaways that I took from your talk and this conversation here. First, very palpably, the limitations and myopias that result from progressive languaging around emerging technologies. Even that phrase itself is laden with all sorts of heavily ambivalent language that is passed off as neutral. I also, and I'm reading this in your career, big fan, by the way, as well as your talk, this relationship of future imagining to community formation and the labor that is involved in those sorts of pluralities and the kind of prismatic nature of that labor, but towards the work of building that future, not just like speculating or critiquing, but building. And so the relationship of these different kinds of labor, I have a ton of questions about, again, especially in relation to your own prismatic career. Finally, I'm struck by two kind of recurrent metaphors, the table and the matrix, and how these exist in relation to one another is as a function of labor, super fascinating, but also just your citational practices here, like you're bringing in Sasha Shak and Ruha Benjamin, as well as dozens of people that I have cursory or no familiarity with. And you do this, the New Reality Project too is full of hundreds of citations of people that I would otherwise have no exposure to, let alone such like, it's a bibliographic trove, which is its own form of labor. So I'm getting kind of free associatively ahead of myself, but Kamal, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the table and the matrix and sort of how you juggle these either metaphors or the nature of inclusion or exclusion as a function of those.
Oh my God, I really love that question. What a challenge. You never drop an easy one. I love it. 'Cause it seems so simple, but it's really deep. I mean, when you think about the table, I mean, there's critiques around that metaphor completely. Like, who the hell created this table? Why do they get to create the table? You know, why don't we make our own tables? Like, you know, one of the people we interviewed, Noni de la Pena, talked about how, well, there was a VR event in Silicon Valley, and she noticed that everybody on it were male presenters, cisgendered male presenters. And she was like, she called the programmers like, hey, I'm at least one woman that can, you know, hold her own in this space. And the response was, oh my God, we didn't even realize we only program men. And so when they kind of dug a little deeper, there was this culture of campaigning to get on those panels. And so that was a big influence on the programmers. And so when I took that information to other people we were interviewing, women that also had, you know, kind of enough cachet and expertise to be on those panels, there was responses like, I didn't even know that was part of the culture. And I didn't know I had to be campaigning. I thought this was a meritocracy and my own, you know, work would be recognized and you know, pulled onto these panels. So, and then one of the women I interviewed said, I don't want to have to campaign for those slots. You know, like that's not a mode. And particularly they identified it as kind of masculine, feminine roles, like in terms of, you know, I don't know. I mean, this is super complicated and problematic to put it in those broad swaths, but you know, just different ways. And I wouldn't even say just in gender dynamics, but even in cultural dynamics, there's just different ways of relating that doesn't have to be that kind of aggressive, what some might define as an aggressive mode of, I'm going to get on, you know, kind of push in and promote myself in this very specific way. And so that I think about in terms of the matrix, I mean, in terms of the table, it's like, who gets to define what that is? And is it, you know, the lean forward assimilation, or are we changing where the center is, and how do we define that? In terms of the matrix, it's kind of a buy-in to a narrative, right? You know, when you think about making a new reality, you know, you look, I did a lot of research on how story actually impacts the way in which we, you know, prescribe identity, the way in which we prescribe behaviors, the way in which we accept a set of things as true, and how, you know, particularly artists, they challenge that and can actually shift our perspective. Like there's an artist that's doing a project around, they just changed their name and their pronouns. So I apologize, I don't know their new way of identifying, but they did a project where they worked with an astrophysicist, you know, and they were looking at the nature of what's called a vampire star, a star that kind of sucks the energy from another star. And the linguistics around that was extractive and aggressive and traumatizing, really. And they reframed it from what they call a feminist lens, where it was gifting. And it was looking at something like one generation passing on to another generation, like the idea of birth, like giving your life, you know, your own, you know, DNA, your own whatever, to the next generation. And that's when I think about the matrix, like how are we thinking? Like it's so much about how we are framing what, you know, stereotype threat and how that impacts. Like, you know, Omar Wasso was the first, you know, person with his partner to create social media. This is, you know, a Black man or mixed race man, and he's a hidden history. And I asked him when he started, I'm sorry, I'm going a little too far, but when I noticed that there was 25% participation on Twitter by Black Twitter, I said, do you think because you started social media essentially with a blackplanet.org that you were kind of talking about call and response, like you designed call and response into it, and that's why Black affinity is happening on Twitter? And he said, that wasn't accidental. I said, was it subconscious? He goes, we were trying to create a call and response website in the 90s. So you think about the ways in which even our narrative around stereotype threat that it's the white male innovator that has given us all these gifts, when you don't even think about the reality of those other aspects. So when I think at the table, it's almost like blowing up the narrative of the Matrix and unplugging, because you're like, oh, there is more to this reality than what is being told to us. That's it. I'm shutting up.
So no. It's so wonderful. It just is wonderful. And the threads that are kind of connecting all of your talks and all of your perspectives are really interesting for me to be experiencing right now. So thank you for that. I am also volunteering. Sydney's right here for me. I'm also volunteering Sydney as your hype man for any future. I'm sure that he'll do it, but if you need one, you don't need one because you're great on your own. But if you need one, Sydney's there for you. Kamal, Sydney, thank you so much for that. We'll
Give it up for Kamal.
Wait till it's his turn for me to comment. He's about to get blown up.
Yeah. And I just want to thank Christopher and Eleanor for putting into the chat, just kind of annotating with examples and links what Kamal shared. If you have others, folks, in the room, please do that as we go along. Michelle, I'm wondering if you might, so as you talk to us about kind of what you're experiencing now, you were your plans were derailed for actually recording your keynote, though you went through the process of developing it. I wonder if you might talk to us about the ideas that you had in that presentation.
Yes, no, I'd love to. It was very revelatory to realize, the presentation was actually informed by the fact that my emphasis on different senses rather than sight just brought me back to that conversation we all are familiar with, which was our vision-centric society and also tech as well. But before I sort of share some of the things that I had hoped to put up on a video, I just want to mention something about Kamal's citational practices that were just mentioned, because it's labor, but Ruha Benjamin does the same thing, which is this certain particular kind of labor I really appreciate, because so much creativity fetishizes the singular genius who innovates sui generis rather than in community or for community. And that notion of genius is so tied to American self-possessive individualism. So I always feel leavened by Kamal enacting knowledge creation that is not dependent on that model of the individual too. So it's labor, but it's a particular kind of feminist, it's often framed that way, sort of labor too, that I just so appreciate. But some of the things, the way I had intended to kind of frame the conversation was thinking about what can AI do for the arts, but also what is the arts doing for AI. So I just want to mention a couple of things, particularly in terms of equity. I was very struck by, I think it was more a few years ago, AI generated or augmented art was really helpfully upending, I thought, the professional art world in particular in terms of equity. So AI was reviving all these foundational questions in the arts and humanities about, what is or what is not literature or art, who or what can make it, how it's credentialed, how it's compensated, who arbitrates taste, value, valuation, provenance, especially in the case of AI or GAN generated art, who gets to decide the deciders and who or what counts as makers. Those questions just fascinate me. So that's part of the things I've been thinking about, but also in terms of what does arts do for AI, particularly in terms of equity. One of the things I'm struck by being in what Ruha Benjamin told me at a conference recently, she's like, you're in the belly of the beast. And so in Silicon Valley, in this particular space. So I'm struck by the fact that literature, if I think of arts writ large, whether it's literary, performative, music, visual, whatever, but the arts and literature doesn't aspire to this seamless user experience. And it turns to the seams that we're all seduced into kind of not seeing. It encourages us. I teach a course on James Baldwin a lot. We know, and he often talks about the importance of look again, because fiction isn't frictionless, and poetry will not optimize. And I really appreciate how the humanities and value arts value the pause. They don't push for speed and maximization. They encourage reflection over regulation, which isn't to say that, reflection precludes regulation, but they tend to prioritize improvisation over pattern recognition, and possibility over prediction, and social good over capital gain, and the acknowledgement of narrative perspectives versus text implied omniscient anonymity. Alice Adams calls it the view from nowhere. I think about how the arts explore the complexities and continuum of individual choice over so-called, personalization, and the ways in which knowing thyself doesn't equal the quantified self, and I think of literary achievement in general as pretty indifferent to the mindset of efficiency and blessings of scale, as they call it. In fact, it critiques those. So, and in the arts in particular, I'm very interested in how it resists the notion of identity categories that aren't reduced to data points, which is to misunderstand and misrepresent race, for instance, for what it actually is and does as a social dynamic, indexing always political tensions and interests. I'm also, this is the last thing, it would have been a lot to put in 15 minutes in a video, but one of the things I'm struck by is that the arts in particular that I've been working on challenge corporate notions of that DEIJ inclusion. So, which is folded under, as you know, the issue of safety, which for many of us can be shorthand for safety from lawsuits in case the tech does harm, and mitigation of lethality, in which communities are impacted are often seen, to Lauren's point, not in terms of cultural producers, just as consumers. And I think it also really, even the visual arts move us away from this vision-centric tech with all the issues around surveillance that we know, to think about sight as blinding, blind to other interpretive frames and epistemologies. I always think of Frantz Fanon, who talks about the cultural training of the eye. And then I think of disability activists and artists and scholars that have long pointed out access functions on so many levels. It doesn't mean noblesse oblige, simply, entree into the world of the so-called able-bodied, or as Rosemary Garland talks of, the normates. So both my vision and thinking about different ways of seeing the world brought me to move away from those questions of access, not just as accommodation and shuffling of the seats at the table, but as Kamal said, upending them as well. And I think that's, even though we are speaking to, we've heard that before, I think what that actually means in a tech space for those who are designing and producing it is tricky. So one of the things that I talked about was just classes and change in education. I know, see, sorry so much.
No, Michelle, well,
sorry.
Lauren, you all should know that Michelle and I had an evening conversation, and it was doing this thing where it just was gaining more and more momentum, and it was wonderful because of this energy that we're getting right now. Michelle, you should know that in the chat, Carlos said, Michelle, this is a poem spoken. I mean, is just a fan. Everybody was feeling your words right now. So I just want to make sure you saw that. And that was accented by
can't see it,
your hype man also, Sydney. And so, Michelle, part of what I was getting from what you shared in your kind of prepared keynote, and even just now, was a real, was a sense of the possibility, power, influence of artists and art. And you had that progression thinking about cultural storytelling leading to shaping civic imagination, leading to animating political engagement. I wonder if you might just comment on what you think the possibilities are of shaping civic imagination, like how the arts are able to do that. What are the forces that the arts tap into influence that have that ability as encouragement for some of us to find that and to tap into it?
Yeah, I was thinking in particular when you were mentioning the comment that I'd made that the arts can animate the civic imagination, which can translate into political action. And one of the debates about framing the arts that way can be that, we don't want to assume the arts are instrumental, that, you know, which is basically to make it propaganda. But to be able to account for the way it shapes our imaginary. So the example that I use is Adam Mosseri had clearly had a white paper on the problematic outcomes for using likes on Instagram, but it was only after he saw, as I'm sure many of you did, that episode Nosedive on Black Mirror, which shows sort of enacts sort of some of the social and cultural complications of that. And this was before China's social credit system even sort of had come out. And that is when he says in the New York Times, that's what made him realize that he needed to remove that like and not like system. So sometimes it can actually prompt the, you know, it's sort of the Shakespearean, you know, it can prick the conscience in a way that other media can't. But I also actually think it shapes the imagination, not always in such a, as I mentioned, instrumental way. So for instance, because it's not tethered to a profit motive, because it's not you know, necessarily tethered to policymakers who I'm supposed to be talking to soon. So it's like trying to think about, I'm not going to give you the 10-point plan, you know. And I think, however, that doesn't mean it's not, doesn't have traction in the real world. It actually has maybe a more potent one. So one of the things that I've been trying to work in a particular space, which is a complicated one, is actually through education, both. So I've been teaching a class on AI activism and arts for undergrad and graduate students, and it has STEM students and humanities students and creative practitioners and community activists. And I'm not naive about the fact that the space of education, higher education, is fraught. I know Timnit Gebru and others have made very compelling cases for why that's a not useful place, because it's fraught with all sorts of things around tenure and around publishing, particularly in the sciences. But I do find that a space of imagination where, for instance, with the students who are doing projects, there's different people at the table. It's not a sage on the stage. It's a kind of there's different knowledge makers and different frames of references and different epistemologies. So what they end up creating before they have a major, before they, you know, go into whatever sphere of work they're going to be, whether they're going to be creators or not, they're bringing and shaping different models. So this has decolonial AI, disability AI, queer AI, lots of different things. I'm not tracking the outcomes, maybe I should be, but it is also, like Toni Morrison says, you know, she writes a novel and it's out there in the world and it's going to be doing things I can't necessarily anticipate. So I actually still find spaces like that very powerful. And you also, it might be deferred impact. It could be 2 years or 5 years or in different ways in which it's actually shaping, which I think is complementary to what Lauren and Kamal are both doing as well, and Sydney.
Yeah, no, totally. And to Kamal, if we're going to bring you into this conversation, Michelle, thanks for that, and get a sense about what you were hearing and what Michelle shared.
I mean, I just feel such a kindred.
Yes.
Kind of conflict on a call, you know, like challenging each other, and honestly, I feel like just the yes person here, because I think Michelle's bringing up so many points that are critical to our frameworks. Like, how are we thinking about these technologies, particularly the idea of AI around disability AI, and I think there is an optimism in that there is a utility of these things, that we do not have to, that if we can find that right framework, when you think about look again, like how can we access the potential there in a way? And I think that's the work that Michelle's doing in The Belly of the Beast, right? I mean, not to, you know, get ahead of myself with Sydney's, you know, talk as well. It's like, how do we function as people that are trying to reach for, you know, that better option with how we are moving into our futures, and be complicit in so many priorities that are kind of challenging each other. And so, you know, when it just reminds me, just in general, your role and the leadership that you're showing and the questions that you're asking and the ways in which you're provoking. When I first started at my first like kind of ivory tower institution, my friend Hank Willis Thomas, he said, okay, and I remember there was something I saw and I was like, I'm going to do an open letter in the New York Times. This is the and he stopped me and he said, listen, you can do that in 3 years. Right now, we need to be a spook at the door. And just get in and just like understand what's happening in here. And so anyway, I just wanted to applaud your practice around, you know, asking these very critical questions and bringing these really critical frameworks to this work around artificial intelligence, the arts, and kind of bringing a humanities lens to that work. So,
You know,
Yeah.
it's very,
Michelle, go for it. Yeah, go
I just
for it.
wanted to add, you know, because I appreciate I appreciate Kamal anyway. I just like wish we were all, we all need a drink after. But, you know, one of the challenges with doing, you know, I think of Ruha, actually everybody should know, Kamal introduced me to this amazing person too, who is working out of Princeton and is sort of changing institutional structures that are medieval, literally. So, but, you know, you also mentioned, before you're talking about stereotype threat, and I think to recognize that any institutional changes which bring in education are always situated, complicated, compromised, you know, not like there's any peer space that is not. And I think that, you know, I'm a full professor. My junior colleagues of color are literally told, don't do this interdisciplinary class because it's, you know, what's the journal that's going to publish that, you know? And I think there's also, I mentioned the challenge that Kate Stark had in her latest book, had talked about the importance of artists learning more to have technological expertise. But I actually think it, you know, because presumably artists have more time, you know, versus the technologists who are doing the real work of the world or whatever. And I'd love to flip that script a little bit, which is also technologists should behoove themselves to learn more about arts and humanities. And that means, you know, all other kinds of approaches also to AI as well, because there's such a differential status between the humanities and STEM fields, especially on AI. Yes, yes, Omari. I'm in New York. You're gonna have to step on me to enter.
No, super duper fantastic.
Thank you. Come on.
I mean, it's just, of course, it's great, and we'll have more kind of time together right after we hear from Sydney and Lauren. But thank you both. That was fantastic, and of course, I mean, this was just a big tease, Michelle, for us, like getting to hear you talk. And I hope somebody drops into the chat like how we can secretly audit your classes and just like spend more time with you. But that's another thing. Sydney, let's get you on stage.
Razzle dazzle.
And also, folks, and I just continue to encourage you all. You've been doing a great job with using the chat, both panelists and audience members. But please keep it coming. Again, as you have questions throughout, let us know as you want to kind of accent, affirm something that was said, or if you just want to be a nice kind of citizen of our session, and as you hear references, give us links to those. That would be absolutely wonderful. So Sydney, you of course recorded a keynote summary, highlights. Go for it.
My keynote was a swear word addled tirade against capitalism, a rumination on my father's recent cancer diagnosis, and also included a bit about how it was I became a choreographer, specifically interested, not to say invested, in emerging technologies of robotics and AI. Finally, the video was kind of meditation on the profound not okayness of our moment on so many registers, as well as a kind of exploration or discussion of one of my favorite writers, Anna Watkins Fisher, She has a phenomenal book, The Play in the System, The Art of Parasitical Resistance, which is all about sort of aesthetic strategies of resisting capitalism and its sort of hegemonic ways and means. And so I want to put a giant plug and underline for Anna's work in this context. Her writing is in dialogue with Simone Brown and Ruha Benjamin, as well as like Jose Munoz and other scholars of performance. And if I successfully communicate literally nothing else, it's to buy that book on a non-Amazon platform.
Great. Solid. So
I don't know.
So speaking of non-Amazon platforms and just kind of systems of Silicon Valley, you talk about entrepreneurship and you get into the kind of etymology of the word, and it's kind of swimming out from energy. And how do you imagine that people who you say it's very hard to be a non-participator, how do you swim out and be a non-participator? What's your sense about how you hold those two things in balance?
Yeah, so
not be a non-participator. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the challenge here is maybe less about like do or don't participate, in the sense that I don't know that participation in so many registers is an option anymore. I mean, there's been any number of sort of gotcha articles about like how impossible it is to not use Amazon Web Services, for example. Like it's impossible. Like it's just like that's the wrong battle at this point. The question I think instead is, what does it mean? And here I'm absolutely echoing my esteemed nerd friends here on the panel. What does it mean to leverage our positionality and the communities that we are a part of, and also maintain or are in service or support of, in an effort to live under and within and through these kinds of platform capitalist entities? This is a very unsatisfying space. Like I mentioned this in the talk, like I'm really frustrated on some level with the play in the system, because I wish it was a kind of anarchist cookbook of anti-surveillance capitalist practice. The reality is much less satisfying and much more implicating. I think the question, especially for those of us who occupy situational and positional privilege, is about like, what do we do with that privilege? Understanding that we are already compromised and that is not a choice. The choice is how we act, not how we exist.
And what's your hunch about what artists are able to do with that privilege? And even if, let's even think about what have you thought about doing with that privilege as an artist, just to make it even a little bit more personal, and so that you're not speaking about some kind of general unnamed group of people.
The artist. Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, I'm thinking of, Rashad's work is sort of been mentioned in a variety of capacities here. I'm struck by the radical queerness of that work, as well as the fact of Meta's support of that work. The way that money gets sort of crucibled through these artistic projects is super complicated and also deeply unsatisfying on a certain level. Like I would love for like artists to be able to like not engage. And I'm thinking here of like Google Creative Lab kinds of environments, where even Bell Labs to a certain extent, like these are incubationary spaces that are underwritten by, in no small manner, like military industrial resourcing phenomena and infrastructure. And yet I will never be the person who's like, actually, artist, you shouldn't participate in that because you can ethically do better. Like that's just not the stakes, right? I'll say for myself, as a choreographer working here at Brown, the nature of my creative practice has shifted markedly over the last couple of years, especially as I've been more deeply immersed and or implicated in these kinds of structures. Like my choreographic practice these days involves military robots. Like we have a bunch of Boston Dynamics spot robots here in our lab, which we paid for with like a Navy defense grant, because why not like double down on the implication while we're at it? And we're making them dance. And we're putting them on shows, and we're taking them on tour. And on one hand, like I want to be really careful here, because this is not an exercise in robots doing cool shit, right? Like this is not about like the sort of utopian, like, and Kamal, again, your work is really integral here. Like it's not about like technology is good if it's made art or something, right? Or made performance, as though we can art wash these technologies which have horrific and violent ramifications and repercussions, especially for communities of color. The opening, I think, is to use art making practice and performance as a way of engaging, even cursorily, with the really gristly, gritty conversations around like where these technologies come from. So in the case of Boston Dynamics, this is a company that for years, predating my work, was invested in dance and choreography specifically. And they, prior to COVID, were planning any number of live performance events at venues like South by Southwest. The founder, Mark Raybert, has rigorously documented stakes and investment in dance and dance performance. As a dancer and choreographer, like I feel very ambivalently about this. Because on one hand, the work of the roboticists and choreographers, and specifically the choreographer Monica Thomas, whose crediting is generally not present in so many of these YouTube videos. These are multi-hundred view YouTube videos that have a tremendous cachet in STEM and choreographic contexts. And yet the labor practices and citational practices within them are really, it's a slurry. And I'm thinking here of my friend and collaborator, Jessica Rayco at Wayne State University, who writes extensively about how dance specifically, and Africanist dance in particular, has been activated and in some cases like weaponized by companies like Boston Dynamics. I'll just say, like, I don't know how to try and answer your question more directly. As a choreographer who works with these technologies, because the technologies and the dancerly impetus of these things like doesn't go away if I don't pay attention to it. I choose, and this is my choice, to engage as fully as I can, because the gambit here, and I'm echoing Michelle's comments about pedagogy in a fashion. My hope is to use my privilege as an educator in the service of enabling my students' understanding of the actual technical and aesthetic complexity that they're working with.
Mm-hmm. Solid. Lauren, I'm wondering what you felt like you heard in that. I know that part of what I heard actually similar, that was kind of common between your two talks, was this this understanding of the balance and this comfort with things being in a balance, and that being okay, and a certain kind of awareness and kind of using that as a way forward. Lauren, I'm wondering what you were hearing.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, a couple of things now that we know Amazon is going to sponsor the symposium next year. Thanks, Sydney, for that. We were really looking forward to those dollars.
I'm sorry, y'all. I don't, no judgment, except don't.
It's everyone who is like a hardcore anti-capitalist has one company. My podcast, I trash Choice Hotels all the time. So it's like a running joke that like they're never going to sponsor our podcast. Sorry, things like that around capitalism and how we participate in it, like the necessary participation that we really can't extricate ourselves is like so real on a number of levels. And in the digital space in particular, it becomes really, really clear, like the dollars just track so well. And that's what really resonated with me about your talk. And the other thing that you just brought up were how easy it is for labor to become invisible. And in particular, the labor that Black and Brown women do on platforms, behind the scenes, how that not just invisible, but also uncompensated largely. And the scale of platforms that are built on the labor of Black and Brown women digitally and the amount of wealth that is currently being stolen is just ridiculous. And Sydney, when I was listening to your talk, by the way, editing skills, amazing. Like it's so,
come on,
right? Like no one's brought that up. Like it's so nice to be with a white dude who's doing the most, like to have you as a friend. Like you did more than everybody else, dude. Like you're holding it down for your people.
Well,
Thank you for that. Your video was great. It was super entertaining.
I have to credit real quick Sam, the editor. I'm sure he will appreciate this. I can take no credit for Sam's incredible editing, and I know.
There, that's we're back to the norm. It's okay, Sydney.
I'm back to being an adequate white dude. I'm sorry.
But no, I mean, your talk really resonated because like we are all operating in this capitalistic system, and I'm constantly thinking about like, this is the shit that my students are wrestling with. Like they're in college, they're seeing like, I just turned 40. They're looking at my crap life, you know, like having a law degree, a ton of debt, you know, being sort of beholden to all these forces, and they're actively trying to opt out. And like, to me, it's like, I'm probably never going to be able to opt out, but like, how can we build structures so they don't have to participate in capitalism and have this constant tension? And I guess my question for you, Sydney, and Amara, I just totally like ran through your comment, how you brought me in.
No, it's great. No,
I did have a question for you, Sydney, which is, it's really basic, but like, what are you optimistic about, if anything?
You know what? Actually, Lauren, thank you for that. And I'm going to pull Michelle, and actually, I'm not going to do this. Our pal Nikki in the back end is going to kindly pull Michelle and Kamal in. And Lauren, I wonder if we might pose that question to all of you. What are you feeling optimistic about? And Sydney, feel free to kind of go with the momentum and kick us off there.
Yeah. So I get a little bit into this talk, Lauren. I so appreciate the question. I'm optimistic about bodies and embodiment and how we are increasingly able to have conversations around like our fleshy bits and corporeality in these kinds of STEM contexts. This has been one of the hills that I've been slowly dying on for the last 10 years. Now, like figuring out how to not only like engage in conversations with companies like the Googles and the Metas about like how virtuality affects corporeality and vice versa, but also like pedagogically, and again, Michelle, I'm thinking of you here, like what does it mean to do rigorous interdisciplinarity that centers the body and bodily concern as expressed in many different possible facets, but like the urgency of bodies and embodiment takes so many can take so many forms at this moment. And I'm thinking here of everything from Roe to Black Lives Matter to like the centrality of bodies and specific kinds of asymmetries across bodies is being like those asymmetries are, and I'm thinking actually, Lauren, of your talk here, those asymmetries are exploding. These are not compressing, these are not contracting. And so I think part of the political work here is to maintain conversations around embodiment, around embodied experience. And this is what I do with my robotics students functionally, is like we work in contact improv. Like we have really, we do the studio practice, but then we also have really technical, but also like aesthetically sophisticated conversations around like where bodies live in relation to each other, and then in relation to larger sort of apparatuses of computation and control. I'm bullish on bodies.
I saw
go for it.
I'm just interrupting that Sydney and his colleagues, Heidi Boisvert and Melissa Painter, did a project on the Plaza at the Music Center on Sunday called Run, Skip, Play, where they basically said F you to the self. As something that you hold your body like this and it kind of owns you, to something that you kind of recontextualize your relationship to and kind of make body first and still use the functionality of a cell phone to create these beautiful augmented reality and AI tracked visualizations and so forth, and sound, spatialized sound. But it was interesting to like people were having the cell phones in their hand. They're like, wait, what? It's just in my hand and I'm mostly moving. So yeah, just wanted to double click on the practice and action.
Michelle,
Amara,
you wanted to get in?
I did want to just mention something about, since you were talking about bodies, one of the things that was interesting to have STEM students and arts practitioner and art history folks and community folks together in a classroom was a lot of the conversation around AI development and technologies and bodies with like assistive technology. you know, either it's cochlear implants or it's exoskeletons, and thinking about bodies in a very particular way. And one, unfortunately, that tracks, you know, optimization of bodies, which takes us really quickly to like eugenics. Actually, it's a progressive model of the body that gets sort of grafted onto a lot of technological design, at least that I've been seeing. So when you're talking about the other ways of being and moving in the world, and embodied ways of moving, but opening up what body means, actually changed. Well, first it just gave them vertigo, the STEM students. So because these are different vocabularies and different, you know, what do they do with that? Especially because the curriculum doesn't host those kind of conversations. So the kind of meta conversation, as well as the multiple exposures to it. And we have at Stanford Karma, and there's folks who are, as you know, people who are also working around these kind of spaces. And I think that's where I'm optimistic, frankly. I don't know what that is. It's not going to be, they're not going to try and step out of anti-capitalist practices. They realize they sort of can't, but at least there's a conversation about it, which maybe is a low bar, except I find that really helpful because then they all go out and they rethink, what is intelligence? It's not the Turing test, right? And what does it mean to have multiple intelligences, or not just human intelligence? And what's that sort of standard? Or what is creativity? Not as a freestanding question, but what are the interests, you know, usually political or corporate or whatever, animating question behind it? Because I always think of, you know, when Thomas Jefferson was saying, you know, Black people couldn't speak above a line of poetry, he said it not because he was just interested in enlightenment models of identity, but also because he had this notion of it helped leverage the delay of abolitionism. It helped explain how, you know, Black people were non-human and thus should be kept in slavery. So there's always particular ends behind these abstract questions. And so even the body is not an innocent kind of question. So I feel like the arts are the ones who are going to mobilize those questions, and maybe some of the classrooms can be crucibles for them.
And if we, thank you, Michelle, of course, and that finishing super solid. If we think about this idea of the body and we move to a kind of a metaphor, and think about this language that I've heard during our time, the belly of a beast, I wonder what you all are thinking about being within these institutions and thinking about, you touched on a little bit, but each one of you is in an institution. Lauren, you have doubled down with your new gig at ASU. And when we think about possibility in the world, when we think about change, when we think about you know, moving forward, how are you all thinking about the institutions that you're affiliated with and the possibilities? How are you not being kind of oppressed by the institution? How do you see it as a vehicle? And you touched on it, but it'd be interesting. I feel like you have all, and Lauren, I'll go to you first. You've all touched on this a little bit in your talks, but I just wonder what a group think about this sounds like.
Yeah.
Lauren, you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I'll say this is, it's a dovetails with what I'm also most optimistic about is, you know, every once in a while there's some asshole online who says something like, you know, Black people were enslaved in the Americas for so long because we didn't fight hard enough to get out. And Kamal, you're shaking your head like, right? Every once in a while, whether it's Kanye or some other asshole, it comes up, and there's so much data. There's so many stories and like contemporaneous sort of accounts of resistance. And right now, even though we don't think about it this way, or many of us don't, like we're in the midst of the biggest labor movement of the last 50 or 70 years. And there are people who are in the bellies of these companies. You know, Amazon's really getting shat on today, but like people are dying working for Amazon. And Amazon Union was started by, the big one in New York was started by an artist. Chris Smalls is a rapper and promoter. And so I'm optimistic because I'm looking at Starbucks people unionizing. I'm looking at people who are speaking out against progressive institutions like the New Yorker for inequitable editorial practices with regard to Black people and women. Everywhere you look, but it's incumbent on us as artists and thinkers and practitioners to connect the dots for everyone and to give them a clear pathway to plug into. But I think, Google Walkout, those are artists who are making a lot of money, who refuse to participate in military industrial complex and developing technologies that are going to be sold to the US government and surveillance technology and everything else. So that's what makes me optimistic. I think there are people in the belly of the beast. I don't start jumping into the belly until August 16th, so I'm still free and liberated. But from all accounts, from everyone I've spoken to, I am most certainly Jonah and the whale. So
anybody else want to comment on that?
Okay, I have to say, and it's not optimistic, unfortunately, but I am working on an essay called Becoming the Master's Tools, Social Justice Work in the Age of Neoliberalism and the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. I'm going to get a shorter title, but it has been an evergreen issue for me. Like there's these moments, and not just by, predominantly white institutions. I mean, I've also had this experience in predominantly Black institutions that had the kind of hierarchical, house versus field situation going on, like this kind of elitism. And I went in full force, like optimistic, we're gonna do this, it's gonna be amazing. And then I realized, oh my God, I just put somebody into power that is not managing or wielding that power responsibly and in some ways antagonistically. And so, those were my naivete. And that's, I think, one of the challenges, like how do we develop, practices of awareness or pattern recognition that can, help, especially emerging leaders in these spaces, to not kind of fall into those pitfalls, like someone put in the chat, art washing or whitewashing, or things that you think you're doing one thing and you find out, oh, I've just been used to do something else. And, I would say on balance, that's been a smaller part of my experience, because I have been fortunate to be surrounded by people that have been great allies in many ways. And in, like, for example, when there was a point where, Shar Filo, the chief curator of New Frontiers exhibition at Sundance, created an exhibition that didn't even realize was 68% Black, queer, and female on VR. And at the time when, Facebook's Oculus was saying, sorry, there's all men in this and mostly white men, but we got to get the best of the best because we need to make a return on this $2 billion. So just a complete contrast. And when Noni de la Pena started to get pushed into the hidden history, I was on a call with the executive director, Carrie Putnam, and others that said, heck no, we're not going to let her lose. And then we just kept pushing her on panels, saying her name in press conferences. And then she got the next year, she got kind of revered as the godmother of VR. And so there are opportunities to leverage those moments, but it is a challenge. And sometimes you kind of stick your foot in it. But hopefully there's more of the leverage than there is becoming a tool.
Yeah. Folks, we are at the end of our time together. I'm gonna there was some good energy in the chat. My chat is over here. There's some good energy in the chat. And as the kind of final thing, I just want to throw out, I'm wondering if any of you want to respond to any of these questions. There was something in the chat about where you're seeing good examples of co-ops really actually working as a different kind of economic and organizing models. How we think about identifying art, labeling, naming art as actually toxic, and what that looks like and what we do about it. How we think about with kind of balancing issues of surveillance with needing to collect good quality data, and where you're seeing that happening. And then also this idea about, many of us are connected to higher ed spaces, but what are your hopes and dreams for the children, the kids? Like, how are we thinking about the trickle down to them, or how are we thinking about the trickle up from children? So co-ops, surveillance and data collection, Whitney Houston believing that the children are the future, art as toxic or not toxic. Any kind of final thoughts with any of those? And Michelle, I'm not putting you on the spot, but just
Oh my God, my head is spinning. I was looking at the great comments in the chat, thinking that I just want the conversation to kind of continue, and also just still sitting with Kamal's great title, which everybody loves. So apparently you can't change. Audrey Lorde would love it. And Lauren's, the notion of multiple strategies. And I actually think, since you were talking about futurities and children, just too much. But I think there's a sort of what I hear from the panel, or what I think of bringing to that conversation to close out, is just the sense of humility that our strategies may or may not sort of work. So taking the funding, Sydney, from, the military or the DoD, the Department of Defense, to fund something else may work, or it may be co-opted totally. They may take the technology to, refine precision drones. So, but we don't always know the sort of outcomes for it. And Kamal was, amazing, talking about as examples and modeling collaborative change that wouldn't happen otherwise. So change isn't inevitable, and it's not progressive, it takes. And so I think for younger people, this goes back to in pedagogy, whether in classes and modeling, different, some of it may take, some of it will be in the ether, and some we can actually make explicit, will provide, saturate, the world, hopefully, with different models of being, so they can sort of move forward. That is sort of my hope. And Lauren mentioned something that I just wanted to bring in before, because they were talking about the talk, is just histories, remembering that we're not, there's both a cultural honoring and debt to understanding the prehistories to technologies, the prehistories and the debates about subversions and political change, because oftentimes people are moving forward without a recognition of all the work that people have done. I keep people rehearse these sort of debates about what do I do or not. And I think, one of the ways to think about emergent technologies that are so future facing is to actually remember they have prehistories. So that's, I don't know if I covered children,
No, that's
art, probably not all of it.
You brought us home, and you did it without singing that tune by Whitney Houston. So thank you for that. And folks, I just want to I feel super charged up and energized by this conversation. And I know I sometimes say that a lot, but there's something about just you all's approach that really has my mind kind of spinning and working in ways that's really exciting for me right now. And so I thank you personally for that. On behalf of the room and the whole group, I also want to thank you for kind of demonstrating and modeling what being in a community feels like, sounds like, looks like. The ways in which you all, pre this conversation, were tracking each other's work, fans of each other's work, the ways in which you were actively listening to each other and commenting on what you were hearing, both in the structured part of our chat where there was that, but then just in general, also models a certain kind of interplay that we need in order to kind of move forward together. And then certainly you all bringing in other voices into the conversation and reminding us all that there are a bunch of people outside of this Zoom space that are doing great work that we should know about, that we should could consider allies, is also really wonderful as it relates to that sense of community, which, again, I'm thinking about Lauren's earlier point, these pioneers, folks who are thinking differently, who are actually on the edge of creation, and we just got to support them. We just got to help them find each other and us find each other, and we'll get to a good place. And so your time with us was extremely valuable, and I just thank you, Kamal, Michelle, Lauren, and Sydney, so much. I also want to just give a shout out to the folks at the Arts, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Lab at Indiana University, Doug, Joanna, everybody else behind the scenes, certainly my colleagues at Culture Source, for making space for this conversation, which was really wonderful. The great thing, folks, that are tuned in is that you can go on to the kind of web space for this and still connect with the words, certainly Sydney's visuals around these ideas. So, and I encourage you to do that. You'll get sent those links many times over. And then certainly just like track and follow these folks on social media, track and follow the work of the AEI Lab and the Center for Cultural Affairs at Indiana University as people that are just making space for us all to kind of wrestle with these ideas, but also helping us all find ways to use our bits of privilege to get to work and do some action. So enjoy your break before the next panel, which is going to be a real reflection on what we talked about in this space. And we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. I will be coming back at the very end with Doug and Joanna to do a full kind of talk show. What did we hear? So also stick around for that too.
Thank you, Amari.
Thank you, Omari.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All
Thanks
right, take care.
for talking, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.